Hello, I'm Rebecca from Flora and Fauna Cloth Nappies. This video here is just to show you or talk to you a little bit about fleece liners or disposable liners. So you might choose to use liners in your cloth nappies, but you might choose not to. They're not compulsory, it really is an optional extra. They are fairly cheap to buy, so it's not a massive consideration in your shopping list, but it really is a personal choice as to whether you use them. So I thought I'd just make a little video to show you or to explain to you the reasons why you may or may not want to use them. So this is a fleece liner. It literally is a rectangle of fleece fabric. There's not a great deal more to say about sort of how it's made or where it comes from. You can buy a fleece blanket and cut it up yourself into these rectangle shapes, or you can buy them from retailers like us who essentially we cut them ourselves, or some of the other retailers maybe have them professionally made and sort of overlocked around the edges and things. But fleece doesn't fray, so you don't have to overlock it around the edges. It's perfectly fine to go through the wash hundreds and hundreds of times like this and it will still look pretty much the same. It won't fray at all, so that's not a consideration. Now the reason for using a fleece liner is that if you were to use a pre-fold nappy, for example, or a terry nappy, there's no stay dry layer between the nappy and the baby's skin. So of course, this for example is a pre-fold. Once it's been weed on, it's wet. You know, it will start to feel wet. So if the baby's skin is against it, sort of for a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours, however long you're leaving your nappies on for, it's essentially sitting against a wet piece of fabric, which isn't necessarily a problem, but many people don't like the idea of it, and I think it's possibly it could possibly contribute to nappy rash, for example, if you sit in wet on a wet fabric. So if you put the fleece on, it just gives a stay dry layer against the skin. The wee pushes through it, so fleece doesn't absorb liquid, and it doesn't really sort of hold it. It just feels dry the whole time, so that's why we call it the stay dry layer. It's also sort of water resistant. If you held it under a dripping tap, for example, the water beads would just sit on it. But don't let that confuse you. Don't let that put you off. So when the baby wees, it essentially just forces its way through the fleece liner into the fabric, into the absorbent part of the nappy, and takes it away from the skin. So the baby's not sitting in a wet nappy, essentially. So that's why you might want to use them. Now, if you chose to use pocket nappies, for example, this fabric here is already a stay dry layer. So you might sort of think, well, why would you bother putting one in here? Now, that sort of brings me on to the second reason for using liners of either description. It's not just the stay dry layer that you want to consider. They are also really handy because with a cloth nappy, you want the baby's pooed, you would want to remove the poo from the nappy and put it in the toilet. So what you will find is, if you have a fleece liner, the poo is much easier to get rid of. I never thought I'd see the day I was making YouTube videos about poo, but here we are. So you can just pick this up, take it to the loo and sort of plop it out. It's not that sticky, if you know what I mean. The poo doesn't stick to fleece very well, so it almost just rolls off. You sort of let it go in the toilet and it will roll off, as long as it's not a really wet poo. If you've got it all on the nappy, it's just a little bit harder if you're sort of trying to deal with it over the toilet, especially if it has managed to get all over the place a little bit. So many people like to use a liner, myself included, because it's actually just that bit easier for poo disposal. So they're the two main reasons: poo disposal and the stay dry layer against the skin. So technically, on paper, as it were, I don't need to use them with a pocket nappy, but I do because I just think it's easier to remove, and they're no extra work, they're no extra hassle. They just go in the wash with everything else. I do choose to put mine in a mesh bag for what it's worth, because I just find the occasional one will sit in the seal of the washing machine and it's sodden, you know, it's just sort of sat in a little puddle, and possibly not washed properly depending on how early on in the wash it's got stuck. So just in order to keep them all nice and separate and make sure that they don't get lost down the washing machine pipes or anything like that, I wash mine in a mesh bag. But again, as with liners, everything to do with liners, they are optional. It's optional how you wash them. The only other thing to say really is the sort of question between fleece liners and disposable liners. Now, I haven't got a disposable one to show you, and the reason for that is we neither sell them nor use them in our house. So if you want to use a disposable liner, you know, go for it. They are, if you're using a disposable liner in a cloth nappy, you are still saving so much from going into landfill just by using the cloth nappy. So don't worry too much about using a disposable liner. The things that I would say, the key point to note really is that they are not flushable. Don't flush them. They will cause you problems in the end. They don't break down like toilet roll, therefore I don't consider them to be flushable. The poo still sort of needs removing unless you want to roll it up and put poo in the bin, which you're not supposed to do. And some people, sort of anecdotal evidence on this is that they do get a bit scrunched up, so people don't seem to get on that well with them on the whole, from what we can work out. But again, it's really personal choice. You might just think, actually doing cloth nappies, we've got to deal with all the poo, I'm not that keen on it. I tell you what, we'll have disposable liners that will just make our lives easier. Brilliant, go for it. Other people just go, well, if I'm dealing with poo anyway, then I might as well use the reusable ones because, you know, we're already there. So the choice really is yours. There's pros and cons to using liners and not using liners, and there's pros and cons to using fleece liners and disposable liners. It really is down to your sort of personal choice, personal preference, how you feel about it all. You might want to give one type a go and then try the other one, see how you get on. But yeah, that's a video about fleece liners, which I certainly didn't think was going to last for over 6 minutes, but here we are. So thank you for watching if you've got this far.